Welcome to episode 1 of the Sebastian Scales Show. It's amazing how hard it is to just start. This podcast is a prime example of getting so wrapped up in the initial aspect of it. You get so obsessed with how it's going to start that you just never end up starting. And I think it's because the only rule for this podcast is that I have to say exactly what's on my mind 100% of the time. I cannot filter. I cannot change how I actually feel. I mean, I definitely if I no longer feel that way, but I can't not say a thing on the podcast because I'm worried about how people will perceive it. If worry or fear is the basis for not doing a thing or saying something, that I can't do that on the podcast. I have to say it. So what you're going to get listening to this is my unaltered thoughts. And that is scary because I don't know if I've ever really even done that. I mean, obviously to some extent, but I feel like especially on social media and, you know, oftentimes you just feel like you can't really be yourself. And who knows what this podcast will morph into, but like, for example, right there, when I was like, who knows what this podcast will morph into? In my head, I'm like, oh, people are going to perceive that as he doesn't have direction. He doesn't know where he's going to go with this podcast. I have no confirmation that anybody's going to think that or has thought that. The podcast isn't out yet. I mean, it is now that you're listening to it, but like I have so many perceptions about how people are going to view these things, the things that I say. And just then, for example, I assume like worst case scenario that people are going to hear me say that and just turn the podcast off because I don't have direction. Like our minds are so consistently focused on the negative hypothetical scenarios, whether it's how people will perceive a podcast or how people view the clothes that we wear or the posts that we make on Instagram, whatever it is. We are so quick to jump to all the worst things that people could think about what we're doing and saying. And we do that without any confirmation of it actually happening. So far, 0 people have told me that they hate the podcast, and yet I'm convinced everybody does. Without even releasing it yet, I am convinced that people are going to dislike it. And it's funny thinking about that because there are infinite hypothetical scenarios, negative and positive, yet we only focus on the negative ones. And it's so silly to do that without any confirmation that anybody's even feeling that way. Why not just focus on the positive? Why can't every person who listens to this podcast enjoy it? The chances are, if I'm creating it in a state of mind that's like, oh, everybody's gonna hate it, blah, 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 maybe people will hate it. But if I'm creating it, having a good time, whatever you're doing, if you're enjoying doing what you're doing, people are going to enjoy watching you do it. So why worry? Give people the chance to be thinking something positive about you. I've been experimenting with this recently. I've been getting into like affirmations and gratitude, and not that you like get into gratitude, but like consciously practicing and just being grateful for things that I think I would have otherwise just sort of taken for granted. And it really does shift the experience that you're having because you're just in a more thankful state of mind. And I was thinking about how, like, you know, for example, my friend who just moved to California, I was helping him move and he was like, wow, everybody here is so relaxed. And he and I talk about like thoughts and things like that a lot and anxiety and stuff. And he texted me and he was like, so, okay, pause. Right then in my head, I'm like, nobody's going to give a fuck about this story. That's just what pops into my head. This is not a good example. It's not a good anecdote of what the point that I'm trying to make. And again, for what reason? Like, it's crazy that for so long in my life, I've been operating at a point where I just second guess everything. And rather than just jumping in, you know, the best things in my life have happened when I just dive in. Like doing stand-up for the first time. If I had given into fear, I never would have done that, and I would just still be working at IBM. That was the first corporate job that I had right after college, and if I had based my decision around fear, I never would have quit that job. So I'm working on that. I'm working on being aware of limiting beliefs that are designed to keep me in a sort of safe space. You know, it's ego. It's wanting to preserve the image of yourself. And you just don't need to spend any more time dwelling on the negative hypothetical scenarios when you could be considering the infinite positive scenarios instead. So my friend told me that he just was noticing how relaxed people are, and he moved from New York as well, which is where he and I lived together in college, and then also that year that I was in Manhattan. And he works for IBM too. And he texted me and he was like, I had the thought that it was his first day after moving in, and he got dressed that morning, and he said that he thought that people were going to perceive his outfit as not relaxed enough. And he was worried about the thought that came into his mind is that people are going to not like him because he's not relaxed enough. And he was joking about just how silly the thought is, and we were talking back and forth, and I was like, yeah, like imagine the difference in your life experience if instead of perceiving everybody who's perceiving you as not liking the thing that you're wearing or not liking you, imagine that every person that you see is just stoked for you. They see your outfit and they're like, oh my God, this guy looks so sick. This guy is happy. He's relaxed. Nobody is spending the time that they have on earth thinking about how dumb you look in your clothes. Or whatever you're worried about. It's very unique. We have I feel like all of our minds operate in similar ways, but the things that we're worried about are a little bit different. For me, a big thing I worried about is my nose. You see this? I'm accentuating the bump right here, but I mean, my nose looks broken 100% of the time. Dude, sometimes I'll just be interacting with a person and I'll just be like, I bet they think my nose looks fucking huge. Just like while the conversation's going, which all that is doing is just pulling me away from the conversation that we're having. It's taking me out of the present moment and putting me back into my internal worried head. And everybody is doing the same thing. The person that I'm talking to who I'm worried about thinking that my nose is big is in their head worrying about how big their ears are. We're having an autopilot conversation that's not engaged. We're removed from what's actually being experienced, and we're going into our heads trying once again to protect our image and make it so that, how can I make them not notice how big my nose is? Who gives a fuck if they think your nose is big? You have a big nose. Who cares? But it's just crazy to think that the majority of our species is operating this way, and how much potential we have to unlock as a species if we would just let go of that stuff. So, anyway, that's what's been helpful about gratitude, and giving people the benefit of the doubt and not be criticizing your exact self-conscious attributes. You never think about people thinking something just like totally different, like, wow, that guy's got interesting eyebrows. You never think about the neutral considerations. I mean, first of all, most of the time nobody's thinking anything about you, positive or negative, and yet we only consider the negatives. So I've been experimenting with that. Like, I've noticed, I just moved to Venice in California, and I've been going on a lot of beach walks, and I've noticed that sometimes I'll feel myself like physically tense up when I like walk by somebody. It's generally someone attractive, and I'll find myself tensing and feeling like I need to do something, feeling like I need to change myself in order to, I guess, convince them that I'm attractive, to make them like me. I don't trust myself to just behave as the moment presents itself. I feel the need to puff out my chest or be something other than what I am. And all that is just an unnecessary physical tension that is ultimately detracting and causing me to not relax. So rather than thinking that these people, whether they're attractive or not, but if you ever just feel like people are judging you, whether it's somebody that you're talking to or somebody that you're walking by, imagine for a second that they are just so happy for you. They're looking at you and they're like, this fucking guy He just loves it. He loves it here. He's having the best time. Imagine that. And now imagine everyone thinks that, because it's just as possible that they're thinking these positive things as the negative things. And that's what's been happening, is like I've been noticing like my whole state of being is just so much more positive when I assume that people are thinking positive things about me. And that makes me so much more open and positive to other people, because I'm just like, yeah, what's up? Like, I'm not thinking anything negative about you, and I'm assuming that you're not thinking anything negative about me. So we're able to have a conversation that's fully engaged, and neither of us are in our heads. I mean, maybe the other person is, and of course I am too a lot of the time. It's an ongoing process. I find that I still have a lot of the thoughts that are anxiety inducing and self-consciousness, like the nose thing. But when I am aware of it, it becomes a lot easier to let go, or to remember a helpful thing, like the fact that these negative scenarios are almost never correct. It's silly to spend any time dwelling on it. So this is interesting. I got something in my eye. Something went into my eye, and then I just blinked a couple of times, and then it's gone. Isn't that amazing? That our bodies take care of everything. Eventually they shut down and stop working, but for the most part, you can cut yourself, you can lose an arm, you can have all these crazy things happen to you, and most of the time your body will just regenerate without any conscious effort. It'll just happen all of itself. And even regardless of the healing, the basic functioning of your body that's happening all the time is an absolute miracle. We're just breathing and beating our hearts and seeing and hearing and all of these amazing things that we take for granted. Most of the time we're not at all engaged with our senses, and we're just in our heads. It's actually nuts when you start being aware of your thoughts. I'm like big into meditation. I've been meditating for a number of years now. And when you are aware of the thoughts that are coming into your head, it is just nuts how many of them are just wrong and unwarranted, and how affected your body is physically by the thoughts that you're having. And if you're in this state of mind that's perceiving everybody as not liking you and hating what you're doing and thinking about how big your nose is, you feel bad. You physically feel bad. And when you become aware of that, for me, I've started viewing these negative thoughts and negative emotions and feelings as an opportunity to immediately feel good, just by letting go of the thing that's in my head at that time. And then whenever you have a negative experience, a negative emotion or thought, if you're aware of it, it's like, oh yeah, how did I almost forget that I don't need to worry about that at all? And then you're just like constantly having these thoughts pop into your head, and it just like goes right out the other side, and you're met with this sort of base case feeling of relaxation and happiness. What just popped into my head is, this isn't very funny. But who cares? Who cares? I'm enjoying talking about this, and that's enough. This is going to be a little authenticity training for me. So far, everything that I've said has been truthful. And if it becomes untruthful, I'll let you know. It's interesting experimenting with silence. So oftentimes, when you're in a conversation, especially with somebody that you're not comfortable with, and the silence comes in, and it's like, oh, what a feeling that is. Like, you're just desperately trying to think of something to say that's not even, you don't even want to talk about it. You just don't want to not hear something. You don't want it to be awkward. Like, I've started sometimes if I'm in the state of mind that's like confident and not worried about perceptions, I'll just start blurting things out like that. Like, it'll be a conversation, and I'll just be like, yeah, do you think this is awkward? Like, just ask the person, and then it ends up being a funny conversation because you're both just like, wow, why were we feeling like that? Like, there's such a fake level of conversation that happens so consistently that's just like nobody really gives a fuck about small talk, you know? And it would be interesting if, rather than always filling that silence with some dumb fucking, the weather's nice. Not that, the weather is nice a lot of the time, and it's nice to appreciate that with somebody else. But when you're saying things to just fill the silence, it's interesting to sit with that feeling. Like, what is that? Not wanting to have the other person think that you're weird, maybe, for not talking, when chances are they're either just thinking the exact same thing you are about how silent it is and how weird it is, or they're not thinking about it at all. They're definitely not mad at you for it. Probably. But what am I talking about? There's going to be a lot of that in this podcast. A lot of what am I talking about? But I think it's better to do that than try to just keep bullshitting until you come up with the point that you were trying to make. Sometimes, and this comes from smoking weed, especially if I am high. I'm not now, but I'll definitely do some episodes high. But sometimes when I'm high, I will forget, and when I'm sober, I'll forget the point that I'm trying to make mid-point. And I think for a long time in my life, I would get so embarrassed not for having forgotten the point, and I would just try to think of it again. I would just keep saying words until it popped into my head, and it rarely would. But I didn't want to be embarrassed that, like, okay, well, now that I've got your attention and I'm trying to make a point, I don't even remember what it was. It's crazy how much I cared about winning, like, arguments, and just over nothing, you know? Over like, this is actually in middle school, but I was in a band. We were called the Aristorats, and I was the drummer. Travis Barker is the drummer for Blink-182, which was like my favorite band, and I thought that he was like the greatest ever. I thought he was the greatest drummer of all time, and I remember saying that to the guys in the band, and they just roasted me. Like, they were like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, are you even a drummer? And I got and they started listing off all these other drummers that are like way better than Travis Barker. And I got so embarrassed, and I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the feeling of embarrassment. And so I told them that my drum teacher was the one who told me that Travis Barker was the greatest. And I told them that my drum teacher is a way better drummer than any of them will ever be. You just get so, like, viciously defensive, and you start attacking their abilities just because I didn't want to be wrong, because they were attacking my sense of self, my sense of judgment of drummers. They were attacking my abilities to drum. These guys are like my friends, you know, of course, and they were so right. Travis Barker is not it's all sort of subjective, but it was just interesting to get to a point like that where I felt fight or flighty. My heart rate rose a ton. That would be a fun thing to get into in the podcast, is times when your heart rate goes up. And those moments are always so funny, and they're very rarely actual fight or flights. You know, it's just things that we've created in our head to preserve, like as if we're going to die if this image of ourselves is not kept intact. If I have to reevaluate my ability to judge drummers, my ability to recognize great drummers, I think it was because I thought that meant that I wasn't a good drummer. And I couldn't handle that because I already felt like I wasn't super qualified to be in the band. Our guitarist was like an incredible guitarist, and the other guys were good too, but I think it was just a self-esteem issue, you know? And so them telling me that I didn't know what I was talking about with regards to the instrument that I was playing in the band and the people that are good at it, it was an attack. I took it as an attack on my individuality and who I am as a person. even though none of them meant it like that. Of course they all meant it in good fun. Yeah, man, they were probably like, yeah, Travis Barker is not the best drummer in the world, and also you suck at drumming because of that. That's probably how they meant it. It always feels like a bit of a blackout when you go into a fight or flight situation. Not like a real one, but like the ones that you come up with in your mind. You start reacting that way. And then you come out of it and you're like, oh my God, I was so silly to respond that way. I mean, I would just lie my way out of situations like that. Like a big thing for me growing up was like I had a really hard time saying no to people who wanted to hang out and like have a play date. And I mean, ever since I was a kid, I had an issue with that. And I felt like it was just so much easier to say that I had something that I was doing instead of just being like, I don't want to hang out with you. And I understand why I do it. I don't want anybody to feel bad. That's the root of the issue. And so I would just lie. I would just be like, sorry, like I can't. And I was a very social kid, and I'm an only child. So I was always trying to hang out with people, but it would get to the point where I would just like, I had too many options. And it's funny even saying this now, I'm like, oh, you sound like a douche. Like, yeah, man, I had a bunch of friends. Yeah, everyone who's listening to the podcast is probably going to hate you for saying that you had a lot of friends in high school. This is good. I kind of like where this is going, actually, where like every time I say something silly, I could just call myself out on it immediately and not worry about it. Anyway, so I would just lie and I would come up with all these things that I was doing, and it would get to the point where I would just like have too many things that I had told people that I was doing. And then they would like ask me about it at school. Like, you know, how was practice, or how was, you know, band practice or soccer practice, or which were things that I was actually doing. But I would just kind of, it was like half lies, you know, because I would be doing that thing, but it wasn't at the time that you wanted to hang out with me. So it made me feel like it was less of a big deal to be lying about it. But I would just get caught, basically. And whenever I would get caught, I would just feel that same feeling of fight or flight and panic, and I would just need to get out of it. And that's one thing, honestly, like with lying, it feels so easy to do at the time, but it eats at you, even small things. And it's something that I'm working on. I just need to trust myself more. Obviously, at that age, it's different. Like middle school, it's hard to be super introspective and reflective on things like that. But people understand. Like, for example, I had a college friend of mine was wanting to come out and visit for a couple of days, 3 nights and 3 days. And he asked me, he was like, hey, man, like, can I stay with you? And I have a roommate now who we went to high school together. And he was like, hey, can I stay with you? Or should I get a hotel? He wasn't like pushy about it at all. But I realized, like, you know that feeling like when you have to host and you feel like you need to entertain the person that's there? I just didn't want to really feel that. And as you get older, I feel like it's less expected that you would just sort of put somebody up. I mean, if you wanted to come for a day or 2, I think that's a lot more reasonable, but 3 days, 3 nights and 3 days, you know, it's just somebody who's just around, and you wake up in the morning and you feel like you need to do something with them. And I was going back and forth, and I was like really stressing about it because, again, it's rooted in the people pleasing aspect of myself. I thought that if I didn't let him stay with me, that he would be mad at me. And part of me is still like, because I did end up telling him, like, yeah, man, like, I think it's a little bit too long. I think a hotel would be better. But part of me thinks, because there's totally enough room in my apartment for him to stay here. And so I think when he gets here, he's probably going to be like, oh, what the hell, man? Like, you could have totally housed me. But the reality is, if he stayed here with me, a lot of the time I would be stressing about needing to entertain him and feeling like because as I get older, I know that now that I need a bunch of alone time. I think I need more alone time than time with people. It feels like a recharge. And when I don't get that, I get cranky. So I know that the time that we will have together now, like, he'll enjoy being around me a lot more when he's staying in the hotel than he would be if he was staying here. But the reason I'm saying all of this is because it was a perfect example of, like, feeling like I needed to come up with some reason that he couldn't stay here, rather than just being like, yeah, man, I don't think that, I think it's too much time, which is totally fair. I, for a while before I told him that, was like, just come up with a reason why he can't stay. Like, yeah, like, you know, I've got another friend in town, as if he's not going to see that other friend while he's here. Or like my roommate said no, you know. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of freedom in just saying how you feel. You know, yeah, man, I just don't really feel up for having you for that time. That is something that I'm working on. But back in the day, I just couldn't handle it. I could not tell people that I didn't want to hang out with them, at least at the particular time that they asked. And it turned into this really sort of fake thing where I would just be like, yo, let's hang out soon, for sure. And then they'd be like, okay, cool, Tuesday? And I would just be like, nah, sorry, man, I can't do it. And like, there was this one guy who left me, I mean, like every week, multiple times a week, he would leave me voicemails trying to hang out. And, or this is back when we had landlines, so he would leave voicemails on the family landline. And my mom would let me know that he had called again, and I would just come up with an excuse every time. And I'm not mad at myself for that, because how can you be like, yeah, man, sorry, I just don't, at that age, you're like, what, 12? Yeah, man, not interested in hanging out with you. Like, that's devastating. You don't want to make somebody feel that way. But now, being a lot older, it's like, well, I know what's best for me, and I think you have to prioritize yourself, because you're at your best for other people when you're feeling the best yourself. So I know the time that my friend will have here in California while he visits is going to be a lot better. And it's definitely me trying to justify not letting him stay at my place too, but it's all good. How did we get here? I don't know, but it feels good. It feels pretty good. I'm having a fun time. It's funny thinking about this has been 30 minutes, 35 minutes. And it's so hard to start, but when you do start, it gets so easy to keep going, and it's fun, and you stop worrying, and it just becomes so free flowing. And I'm excited to do this because it's an opportunity to further take pressure off of myself to be anything other than what I am. And I feel very relaxed right now. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and thank you so much for watching and listening. Peace.